$43 silver. Too short of a horse. Too short of saving his wife's life. In Millfield, even a missing coin could mean ruin or redemption. The church bell tolled 6 as Thomas Brennan counted the silver dollars in his leather sack. 43, exactly enough for a decent mount and harness. Buy quick, sell dear. The morning stage rattled past Widow Henley's fence, dust settling on the yellow roses she'd planted where her husband lay. Thomas pressed his hat brim low and turned toward the livery. The telegraph key chattered behind Murphy's window. Thomas set one boot on the depot steps, then stopped when the sack clinked. "I'll take payment in gold." Thunder rolled from the west. Murphy's hammer rang against the anvil, each strike marking time Thomas didn't have. Count them slow. The schoolma'am's bell called children to lessons. Thomas watched them run past, their voices bright as new pennies, while the sack grew heavier in his palm. Steam hissed from the morning train's brake cylinders. Murphy stood in his doorway, wiping his hands on his apron, waiting. 43 ain't 45. The sun climbed towards 7 o'clock. Thomas hefted the sack once more, then let his fingers go slack. Thomas Brennan had come to Millfield with $43 silver and a promise to his wife that he'd return with a horse strong enough to pull their plow through Nebraska sod. The church bell had just struck 6 when he counted the coins for the 3rd time, spreading them across the hotel room's rough pine table. Each dollar represented a week of splitting rails for the railroad. His hands cracked and bleeding by lamplight. The morning was already warming when he stepped onto Main Street. The stage from Denver sat outside Carmody's store, its team of 6 blowing hard from the mountain run. Thomas nodded to the driver, a weathered man named Pike, who'd been hauling freight and passengers for 15 years. "Looking for Murphy's livery," Thomas said. Pike spat tobacco juice into the dust. 2 blocks down, past the assay office. He's got 3 good animals, but none come cheap. Thomas touched the leather sack hanging from his belt. The coins clinked softly, a sound that had grown familiar over the past months. "What's Murphy asking?" 45 for his bay mare, 60 for the sorrel gelding. The gray's older but steady might take 35. Pike gathered his reins. "Course, that's if he's selling. Been particular lately about who gets his stock." The stage pulled away, leaving Thomas standing in the settling dust. He walked past the post office, where a cluster of men argued over a territorial survey map, their voices rising with the heat. At the assay office, a sign in the window read, "Gold dust bought fair weights, honest prices." Murphy's livery occupied a long, low building at the end of the street. The smell of hay and horse sweat drifted through the open doors, mixing with the ring of hammer on metal from the adjoining smithy. Thomas paused at the entrance, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. 3 horses stood in the stalls along the left wall. The bay mare Pike had mentioned was a fine animal, deep-chested and alert, with a white star on her forehead. The sorrel gelding showed good bone and muscle, though he pinned his ears when Thomas approached. The grey mare in the end stall had kind eyes and moved with the careful precision of an experienced cow-pony. "Help you?" Thomas turned to find a man in his 50s, watching from the tackroom doorway. Murphy was built like his trade broad shoulders, scarred hands, the permanent squint of someone who'd spent decades judging horseflesh. "Looking to buy a mount," Thomas said. "Something that can pull a plow and carry a man when needed." Murphy walked to the bay mare's stall, running his hand along her neck. "This one's got the strength you want, but she's particular about her handler. $45. Thomas fingered the sack at his belt. The grey mare? 15 years old, but sound. Belonged to a rancher up near Boulder Creek. He died last month, and his widow couldn't keep her. Murphy's expression softened slightly. $35, and I'll throw in the bridle. The church bell struck 7. Thomas moved closer to the grey mare, who nickered softly and pushed her nose toward his outstretched palm. Her breath was warm and sweet with hay. "I'll take her," Thomas said. Murphy nodded toward his office. "We can settle up inside." The office was cramped and cluttered with account books, bill of sale forms, and a collection of bits and spurs hanging from wooden pegs. Murphy opened a ledger and began writing, his pen scratching against the paper. "Name's Thomas Brennan," Thomas said. pulling the leather sack from his belt. Patrick Murphy. The liveryman looked up from his writing. You heading back to Nebraska with her? Soon as I can arrange passage, Thomas loosened the sack's drawstring and began counting coins onto the desk. My wife's waiting on a letter, too. Need to get word to her that I found what we need. Murphy set down his pen and watched the silver dollars accumulate. At 28, he frowned. At 32, his expression grew troubled. Thomas counted out the 35th dollar and stopped, his hand still inside the sack. That's 35, Murphy said. Thomas felt the remaining coins with his fingertips. $8 left from his months of labor. $8 to get himself and the horse back to Nebraska, with enough left over for his wife's medicine. Actually, Murphy said, standing up and walking to the window, I just remembered. That mare, she's got a quirk. Sometimes shies at loud noises. Railroad don't like animals that spook easy. Thomas looked at the coins scattered across the desk. How much for the sorrel? 60. Like I told you, I've got 43. Murphy returned to his chair and picked up the pen. Well, then, we got ourselves a problem. The church bell tolled the half-hour. Through the office window, Thomas could see the grey mare standing quietly in her stall. Her ears pricked forward, as if listening to their conversation. Maybe we could work something out, Thomas said. I could send you the difference once I get home. Murphy shook his head. Nothing personal, but I don't know you from Adam. Cash money or no deal. Thomas gathered the $35 back into his sack, the coins clinking with a hollow sound that seemed to echo his empty stomach. He'd eaten nothing but hardtack and beans for 3 days, saving money for this moment. I'll think on it, he said. Don't think too long, Murphy replied. Got a cattle buyer coming through tomorrow who's interested in the grey. Thomas left the livery and walked back toward Main Street, the morning sun already hot on his shoulders. At the post office, he bought a penny postcard and stood at the writing counter, staring at the blank space where his message should go. He wrote, Maggie, found good horse, but need more money. Will send word soon. Love, Tom. The postmaster, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, examined the card and nodded toward the slot marked outgoing mail. Thomas hesitated, then slipped the card into his pocket instead. At Carmody's store he bought a cup of coffee for 5 cents and sat on the front porch watching the town come alive. The telegrapher emerged from his office and walked toward the railroad depot, a yellow message form in his hand. 2 women in calico dresses hurried past, their voices low as they discussed some matter that made them glance repeatedly toward the church. Thomas was finishing his coffee when Pike returned with the afternoon stage, this one bound for Denver and points east. The driver climbed down from his seat, stretching his back and rubbing dust from his eyes. You get your horse? Pike asked. Working on it, Thomas said. Pike studied his face. Money troubles? Thomas nodded, not trusting his voice. Well, Pike said, settling into a chair beside him, sometimes a man's got to choose between what he wants and what he needs. Question is, which one keeps him alive longest? The church bell struck 10. Thomas pulled the postcard from his pocket and read his words again, imagining Maggie's face when she received it. She'd been coughing for weeks before he left, the kind of deep, rattling cough that spoke of lungs filled with Nebraska dust and too many winters without proper doctoring. You ever been to Nebraska? Thomas asked. Pike nodded. Traveled through once. Tough country. Takes a special kind of horse to work that sod. Takes a special kind of woman to wait while her husband chases after one, Thomas said. Pike stood and adjusted his hat. I'll be here overnight if you need a ride back east. Leave at dawn. Thomas spent the rest of the morning walking through Millfield, counting and recounting his money, weighing possibilities that all seemed to lead nowhere. At the hotel restaurant, he ordered a bowl of stew for 15 cents, his first hot meal in 3 days. The beef was tough and the vegetables overcooked, but it filled the hollow in his stomach. The afternoon grew hot and still. Thomas found himself back at Murphy's livery, standing outside the open doors and watching the grey mare doze in her stall. She was a good animal, he could see it in the way she carried herself, the intelligence in her dark eyes. Murphy appeared beside him, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag. Still thinking? Still thinking. "I'll tell you what," Murphy said. "I like the cut of you, Brennan. You got an honest face. Give me $40 and she's yours." Thomas felt the coins in his sack. $40 would leave him with 3, not enough for train passage, barely enough for food on the long walk home. "Need to sleep on it," Thomas said. Murphy nodded. "Fair enough. But that cattle buyer I mentioned? He's arriving on the morning stage." The sun was setting when Thomas returned to the hotel. In his room, he spread the $43 across the table once more, arranging them in different combinations as if the coins might somehow multiply through geometric arrangement. The church bells struck 8, then 9. He wrote another postcard. "Maggie, coming home tomorrow, horse deal fell through. We'll find another way. Love, Tom." This one he sealed in an envelope and addressed to his wife. The postage cost 2 cents, leaving him $41.08. Still not enough. Thomas lay in bed listening to the sounds of the town settling into night. A piano played in the saloon down the street, its melody cheerful and sad at the same time. Somewhere a dog barked, and a train whistle echoed from the depot. He thought about Maggie waiting in their sod house, watching the horizon for his return. He thought about the promise he'd made to bring back a horse strong enough to break new ground, to give them a chance at something better than the hard scrabble existence they'd been living. The church bell tolled midnight, then 1 o'clock, then 2. At 3, Thomas made his decision. The morning came grey and cold, with clouds building in the west. Thomas dressed quickly and walked to the telegraph office, where he composed a message to the bank in Omaha. "Need loan $30. Stop. Good for it. Stop. Thomas Brennan." The telegrapher, a young man named Willis, counted the words and calculated the cost. $4.60, he said. Thomas paid from his dwindling supply, and waited while Willis tapped out the message on his key. The reply came within an hour. "Loan denied. Stop. Insufficient collateral. Stop." Thomas crumpled the telegram and dropped it in the street. He walked to Murphy's livery, arriving just as the morning stage pulled up outside the depot. A well-dressed man in a black suit climbed down, carrying a leather satchel and looking around the town with the appraising eye of someone accustomed to making quick decisions about value. "That'll be him," Murphy said, emerging from the stable. "The cattle buyer." The man in the black suit approached, extending his hand. "Samuel Crawford, Crawford Cattle Company. I believe we corresponded about a grey mare?" Murphy nodded. "She's right in here, Mr. Crawford. Fine animal. Just the kind you described in your letter." Thomas watched from the shadows as Crawford examined the grey mare with practised efficiency, checking her teeth, running his hands along her legs, lifting each hoof to inspect the shoes. The mare stood patiently through the inspection, as if she understood that her future was being decided. "She'll do nicely," Crawford said. $40, as we discussed." Murphy glanced toward Thomas, then back at Crawford. "Well, actually, I've got another fellow interested. Might have to ask 45. Crawford reached into his satchel and pulled out a roll of bills. 45 it is, then. Cash money, as agreed. Thomas stepped forward. "Wait." Both men turned to look at him. Crawford's expression showed mild irritation at the interruption. Murphy's face was unreadable. "I'll match his offer," Thomas said, his voice steadier than he felt. Crawford laughed. "You'll match $45? Let's see your money, then." Thomas pulled out his leather sack and poured the contents into his palm. The $41.08 looked pitifully small in the morning light. "Thought so," Crawford said, turning back to Murphy. "Shall we complete our business?" "Hold on," Thomas said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the silver watch his father had given him on his 18th birthday. It was a good timepiece, railroad grade, worth $20 in any honest shop. "I'll give you $41 cash and this watch," Thomas said. "That's better than $60 value." Murphy took the watch and examined it carefully, holding it to his ear to listen to the movement. "It's a fine piece," he admitted. Crawford's expression had grown cold. "Murphy, we had a deal. I've come a long way for this horse." "Now, Mr. Crawford," Murphy said, "I never actually agreed to sell to you. I said I'd consider your offer, which I have." He handed the watch back to Thomas. "But I'm afraid I can't take this as partial payment. Too hard to convert to ready money out here." Thomas felt something break inside his chest, a small, sharp pain that radiated outward. He put the watch back in his pocket and began gathering his coins. "Wait," Crawford said. "What's so special about this particular horse? I'll pay $50. Murphy looked at Thomas, then at Crawford. "She ain't for sale to you, Mr. Crawford." $60, Crawford said, his voice rising. "No, sir," Murphy said firmly. "Sometimes a horse needs to find the right owner, not just the highest bidder." Crawford's face flushed red. "This is highly irregular. I'll report this to your territorial authorities." "You do that," Murphy said, "but right now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my property." Crawford gathered his satchel and stalked toward the street, muttering under his breath about small-town merchants and their questionable business practices. Murphy waited until the man was out of sight, then turned to Thomas. "That watch of yours, let me see it again." Thomas handed it over reluctantly. Murphy studied it once more, then wound the crown and listened to the steady tick of the movement. "Railroad watch," Murphy said. "Your father's?" Thomas nodded. "Mine too," Murphy said, pulling a similar timepiece from his vest pocket. "Different railroad, same idea. Some things ain't meant to be sold." He handed Thomas's watch back to him. "Tell you what, Brennan, give me the $41.08 and write me a letter promising to send the rest when you can. I'll trust you for it." Thomas stared at him. "You serious?" "Dead serious. But I want something in return." "What's that?" Murphy walked to the grey mare's stall and opened the door. The horse stepped out calmly, her hooves ringing on the wooden floor. "I want you to tell me her story, the real reason you need her." Thomas took a deep breath. "My wife's sick. We've got a quarter section in Nebraska, but the ground's too hard to break with just hand tools. We need a plow horse, something strong enough to turn sod and gentle enough for Maggie to handle when I'm working the rails." Murphy nodded slowly. "And if you don't get this horse, we lose the land. And maybe," Thomas's voice caught, "maybe more than that." Murphy walked to his office and returned with a bridle and lead rope. "Her name's Belle. The rancher who owned her, he raised her from a foal. She's got more heart than any horse I've ever seen." Thomas counted out his money and placed it on a nearby barrel. Murphy wrote a bill of sale, then tore a sheet from his ledger and handed it to Thomas along with a pencil. "Write your promise," Murphy said. Thomas wrote, "I promise to send Patrick Murphy $3.92 within 30 days of reaching Nebraska. My word as bond." He signed it and handed it back. Murphy read it and nodded. "That'll do." The church bell struck 10 as Thomas led Belle out of the livery. She followed willingly, her steps light and eager. At the depot, Pike was loading mail bags into his stage, preparing for the eastbound run. "Well, I'll be damned," Pike said when he saw Thomas with the horse. "How'd you manage that?" "Found an honest man," Thomas said. Pike grinned. "Those are rarer than hen's teeth out here." He gestured toward the stage. I've got room for you, but the horse will have to be tied behind. It's a long pull to the rail junction." Thomas secured Belle to the back of the stage and climbed up beside Pike. As they rolled out of Millfield, he turned to look back at Murphy's livery. The Irishman stood in his doorway watching them go, one hand raised in farewell. "You ever been in Murphy's shoes?" Thomas asked Pike as they headed east. "How do you mean?" "Trusting a stranger for money you might never see." Pike considered this as the stage bounced over a particularly rough stretch of road. "Once or twice. Lost money on it, too. But I figure trust is like water. You got to keep it flowing, or it goes stagnant." They reached the rail junction at sunset. Belle had traveled well, keeping pace with the stage without apparent strain. Thomas loaded her into a stock car and settled himself in the passenger coach for the long ride to Nebraska. The train pulled out as the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. Thomas watched the Colorado mountains fade behind them, and thought about Maggie waiting in their sod house, about the letter he would write to Murphy when he got home, about the ground he would break with Belle's help come spring. In his pocket, his father's watch ticked steadily, marking time that now seemed full of possibility rather than running out. The train whistle echoed across the prairie a sound of journeys ending and beginning, of promises kept and debts that would be honored. Behind him, Belle moved quietly in her car, already dreaming perhaps of Nebraska soil and the work that waited there. 3 weeks later, Murphy received an envelope postmarked from Nebraska. Inside was $3.92 in silver, along with a brief note. Belle made it home safe. Maggie's cough is better. Ground's hard, but we're managing. Thank you for the trust. Your friend, Thomas Brennan. Murphy folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer, next to a dozen others like it. Small testimonies to the proposition that sometimes a man's word is worth more than his collateral, and that the best deals are the ones that leave everybody richer than they started. If something in this story touched you, linger with us. We'll handle the rest.